All the way down. Keep your head over the ball. Great move. Not like that. Feedback. We are all familiar with words such as these: directed, during, or after an athlete's movement at practice or games, hoping to offer corrections to errors or give direction. Feedback to our athletes is something that most times just naturally happens without much pre-thought. I am guessing that most of us don't realize how important feedback is in the learning process. What kind of feedback, when, and how often? So many considerations I am sure were never imagined. But alas, there is a difference and can affect motor performance, learning, and retention in your athletes. Research shows that some information relative to goal achievement must be received either through intrinsic or augmented sources for any learning to occur, and that is feedback. So let's start by differentiating between the two main categories of feedback: intrinsic feedback and augmented feedback. Intrinsic feedback is feedback internally gathered as a natural consequence of making an action. Like a tennis player hitting an ace, the player uses his or her senses to gain knowledge from, in this case, a successful serve. Augmented feedback is performance outcome information that is fed back to the learner by some outside source, like a coach or video. So this feedback acts as a supplement to the naturally occurring intrinsic feedback, and this is the feedback that the coach has control of. In general, we know intrinsic feedback is most meaningful to athletes, so it is useful for coaches to facilitate athletes' awareness of intrinsic feedback and also supplement intrinsic feedback with their own as a source of augmented feedback. Because we know that too much augmented feedback may cause athletes to become dependent on the feedback, where athletes can only perform skills successfully when the coach is present. And as we know, we can't always be present at every drill, nor can coaches be with athletes during competition. This means that the athlete has not successfully processed the movement on their own and becomes dependent on the feedback in order to perform the skill. Not a desirable attribute. But we also know augmented feedback can provide motivation and energy to the learner, provide information about the patterns of action. This is what makes a coach so important for motor learning. By giving feedback, errors are corrected quickly and kept to a minimum, thus guiding the athlete towards a movement goal. Because of these aforementioned reasons, researchers have sought to explore how to not only deliver augmented feedback in different ways that best facilitates learning in their athletes, but also the timing of which the feedback is delivered relative to their movement. So here in this video, we look at the different approaches in the delivery of feedback. And in the second video, we explore the timing of the feedback. There are two main categories of different approaches in which feedback can be delivered, and they are knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. The knowledge of results is information usually provided after the movement and deals with the outcome. It usually is communicated with an assessment score, as in diving and gymnastics, where the participant must wait for a score to know success, or if a basketball goes in the hoop or it doesn't go in the hoop. The knowledge of performance is referred to the kinematic feedback and deals more with the movement pattern and process of the movement, not the success of the action. Get your elbow up higher or slow down your pace are examples of feedback that gives information about the movement itself, not the success of the performance. It is important to understand that the more precise the feedback, the better results on learning, particularly with higher skilled athletes. But overloading the athlete with more information that can be processed effectively for movement correction has been found to be detrimental to performance and learning. So essentially, knowledge of results and knowledge of performance type feedback can be delivered in various ways to athletes, which have shown to have varying effects on learning. One approach is the use of a faded feedback approach. With faded feedback, the coach gives feedback at a very high frequency level, perhaps after every performance outcome, and then reduces it as the skill is developed. When do you use this approach in your coaching? In what other skills, drills, and activities and areas can you use this feedback approach in your coaching? Bandwidth is another type of feedback based on a preset degree of acceptability or band of performance. And feedback is given only when the actions are outside of this acceptable band. Learners are told ahead of time that they will receive no feedback if they are correct with their movements within the range of acceptability, and will receive precise feedback about the amount and direction of error only when they are outside of the band. The larger the bandwidth or range of acceptability of error, the more learning. And withholding information from athletes on a set of performances that fall within the band has shown to be more stable and consistent actions over time. Can you think of when you use a bandwidth feedback approach in your coaching? In what other areas, skills, drills, and activities can you use this feedback approach in your coaching? Summary feedback is feedback that is given after a series of performances. For example, a coach might say that in the 4th, 5th, and 9th performance you didn't have your elbow up. You might think that this might not be very effective since the learner cannot really associate the feedback with any specific attempt. But this method proves more effectively than if a coach gives feedback after each performance. It decreases the likelihood of feedback dependency by causing the player to perform independently for several performances. It also tends to result in more stable movements because the player does not constantly have to make adjustments in error when feedback is provided after every performance. And lastly, it encourages the athlete to analyze intrinsic movement-produced feedback and learn to detect errors on their own. Can you think of when you use summary feedback in your coaching? In what other areas, skills, drills, and activities can you use this approach in your coaching? Average feedback uses a series of performances as in summary feedback, but only the average of those performances is provided. For example, a coach might say that in 40% of those performances, you didn't have your elbow up. By only using the averages, it allows coaches to get a better idea of just what the athlete's error tendencies happens to be. This method proves to be slightly more effective than summary feedback. Can you think of when you use average feedback in your coaching? In what other areas, different skills, drills, and activities can you use this approach in your coaching? Another method of delivering feedback is called learner-determined feedback, which is one of my favorites, and is where the coach tells the athlete they're only going to give feedback when they asked for it. A very effective approach which is often misunderstood and underused. Can you think of where you use learner-determined feedback in your coaching? In what other areas, drills, skills, and activities can you use this approach in your coaching? In this video, we have looked at the different ways to deliver feedback. In the next video, we will address the timing of the feedback in which these approaches influence learning.